Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to our lecture series on modern Japanese literature. Today we're going to be talking about a story by the author Mori Ogai called Sansho the Steward. The Japanese title is Sansho Dayu. This is a short story, and it's based on an earlier, much earlier Setsuwa, kind of fairy tale or parable, an older story that Mori Ogai significantly revised and updated. So I'm going to go through and give kind of a summary and analysis of the story and talk about some of the key subjects and themes. And this talk, the way that I analyze this story, will be a little bit different than some of the other stories that we've looked at before, some of the other talks that I've done before, in that I'm just going to really go through the story as it progresses, basically chronologically, and kind of give some summary and some commentary, and then talk about the significance of the things that are happening in the story as we go through. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, Mori Ogai, Sansho the Steward. And at the start of the story, we have a family who is going on a journey. And there's two children, young children, ages, the girl is older, Anju is 14, and the boy, Zushio, is 12. And they're walking with their mother and servant woman, and they're journeying to find their father, who went somewhere to work and hasn't returned for a while, and they haven't heard from him, so they don't know what's going on there. The beginning paragraph opens with an excellent description of the characters. So this is great characterization going on here. And it says especially that the girl shows particular fortitude. But overall, there's something sad and transient about their journey itself. Perhaps inherent in the act of traveling, but also in their purpose, which is to find their father who has gone missing. So eventually they encounter a worker as they're walking, and the worker warns them that there have been slave traders spotted in the area, and so the governor of the region that they're in has forbidden anyone from giving lodging to travelers. And this strikes the characters as a particularly harsh measure. They don't really understand how this would exactly solve the problem of slave traders, but there's nothing they can do really, and so the worker invites them to camp out under a designated shelter spot for the night. But there's clearly something, for the reader, we clearly sense that something suspicious is going on. The characters, however, do not have this feeling. They're very trusting and quite a bit naive, actually. And I talked about how Mori Ogai is basically updating this story as well to fit contemporary Meiji situation. This kind of plays into how the characters interact with each other and what their interactions with other characters as well, but I'll talk about this more later. And then something that we notice immediately from the beginning, then, as this woman invites them to camp out in this area, is that the subject of authority emerges. For instance, the governor who has banned residents from giving lodging to visitors. You know, the characters wonder why, but again, there's nothing they can do. They don't question it. They say it's the governor's orders, so, you know, what can we do? And then this woman who invites them to camp out in this designated area they kind of just follow her orders as well. So the characters are, for some reason, shown as being very submissive to authority, and this emerges as an early subject in the story. So as they're camping out then under this bridge in the shelter area that the worker has designated, suddenly this man appears, and he says his name is Yamaoka Taiyu. And he says, "What are you doing camping out under this bridge? Why don't you come to my place for the night? It's not much, it's just a small hut, but it's better than camping out under a bridge." But there's something clearly suspicious about this as well. In fact, the whole thing kind of seems like an elaborate plot to lure the characters somewhere. For what purpose, we don't yet know. But in any case, there's this gap in perception where the characters are very trusting of everyone around them, whereas the reader then, on the other hand, clearly senses that something suspicious is going on. But for the main characters, they simply say of Yamaoka Taiyu that he did not seem at all what they expected a dangerous man to look like. So, okay, doesn't look dangerous, it's probably okay, is their thinking. And then, again, this subject of authority emerges. The main characters, Zushio Anju and their mother, it says that they consent to a certain autocratic tone of Yamaoka's voice, which they are able to put up no resistance. So they're just passively going about their lives, basically, kind of submitting to what emerges as another subject later, destiny or fate, and not really questioning the authority figures around them. And lo and behold, not a surprise to the audience by this point, but a surprise to the main characters, is that Yamaoka basically lured them there so that he could sell them to slave traders. So all of the worker and Yamaoka up to this point were working together with the slave traders. And the two slave traders after that, then they carry the characters off on two different boats, and the children are taken on one boat. The families are separated here, and the mother and servant are taken on another, and both of the boats go in opposite directions, and they say they're going to sell the mother and the servant woman somewhere on Sado Island, and it's not clear where the children are being taken, but there's, of course, the family is shocked and just completely grief-stricken about this, but they go about the whole thing, even getting on the boats, as if there's nothing really that they can do to fight back against what they describe as destiny or fate. And it says they boarded the boats with a certain feeling that there was nothing else that they could do. But, as a reader, we're wondering, well, why? There must be something they can do. They could protest. They have their own agency, right? But it seems for some reason that they don't really exercise this. And then an important piece of symbolism emerges. So as they're becoming separated on the boats, their mother yells out to them to take care, she yells out to Anju especially, to take care of her guardian Jizo amulet. So little Jizo statues are a kind of Buddhist statue that is meant to give protection, sometimes guidance to travelers. But anyway, Anju has a little amulet of one of these figures, and her mother says, take good care of this. So we know that this is now an important piece of symbolism. So eventually the children, the story then focuses on the children, the mother and the servant woman. The servant woman actually jumps overboard into the water and commits suicide. The mother tries to do so as well, but the slave trader stops her from doing so, and she's presumably taken to Sado Island. The children, however, then the story comes to focus mainly on them, and we follow them until they are sold. They arrive in Tango, uh, which is an area in the north of Kyoto Prefecture, a fairly remote area, and they're sold there as slaves to Sansho the Steward, and he is introduced as the governor or the leader of this region. He has actually two sons, Jiro and Sabudo, and he had another son. He has another son, Taro. The story says, but Taro is not in the picture now. He ran away after witnessing Sansho brutally beating and acting very cruelly against some of his slaves. So we know then right from the beginning that Sansho is a rather brutal figure. He gives the characters, the boy and the girl, new names. He calls Anju Fern and Zushio Lily, and he tells Anju to go with the women and to draw salt water from the sea, and then he gives Zushio the job of going into the mountains and collecting firewood. So from around these scenes, very strongly we sense another important subject emerging, and this is the subject or subjects of slavery and captivity. But again, the same subject of fate or destiny is also very present at the same time. And just to cite an example from the text, it says, as Anju and Zushio ate their morning meal, they bravely came to the conclusion that, subjected to such terrible misfortunes as they were, their only recourse was to bow their heads to fate. But I mean, it's considering how the characters have acted up until this point, it's hard to say as the reader. This is hard to judge. Is this their only recourse? I mean, aren't they being a bit overly submissive and fatalistic here? Isn't there something that they could do? I mean, now they're certainly in dire straits, of course, but as a reader, of course, we hope that the characters will not subject themselves to this fate and try to escape, but we'll have to wait and see if that actually happens. And then I mentioned that they're given these different tasks, and they're only able to complete these tasks through the kindness of other workers, because both of Anju and Zushio, and I should have mentioned this earlier, and their mother, they come. It's clear that they come from an aristocratic background, and that their father has gone away on some job, but that he might have been banished or gotten involved in some political trouble. We don't really know, but the family anyway, and the children have not grown up working their entire lives. They've always had other people working for them, we get the sense. And so the story says it many times, Sansho is disappointed with them because they look weak or frail or something. And this also hints, to their aristocratic background. So they've never done these tasks before, and they have no idea what they're doing, basically. So other workers have to kindly help them along. Actually, in our class, we stopped the first reading. We divided this reading in half, and we stopped the first reading here. So this would be the end of our first class reading. But I'm just going to continue on in the lecture and go on to the second part of the story as well. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about some kind of transformation in the characters, and especially Anju, that happens as they're in captivity of Sansho the Steward. So one night, Sabudo discovers Anju and Zushio pretending to plot out a fantasy in which they escape and are reunited with their parents. And he thinks they should be punished, but they protest. They say they're just pretending, and the issue is left temporarily unresolved until that night when they're suddenly awoken to the sound of Sabudo and his men coming. And he takes them to Sansho to be branded with a hot iron on their foreheads. And this is described as being obviously incredibly painful and traumatic. And afterward, the characters stumble back to their little hut, and they quickly pull out the Jizo amulet and begin to pray to it. And it says, as they do so, suddenly the unbearable pain seemed to melt away, to vanish. And now we have also here another kind of subject or some kind of symbolism emerging, and this is the strongly religious symbolism, or the subject of faith and belief in Buddhist gods in this case. And as they pray to the statue, they realize that their wounds, in fact, are gone, or they disappear. Then it says that they must have fallen asleep after that, but when they wake up, the whole thing kind of seems like a dream, and they wonder, even did that actually happen? But when they look at the Jizo amulet, they see that it has scars on its forehead. So presumably it somehow magically took their wounds away and cured them. So there's it also says, the story says that the Jizo amulet has scars in the shape of crosses on its forehead. So I don't know if this is intentional, but there seems to be some kind of a cross or a mix of religious symbolism going on here as well. So then after this, the story then says that Anju undergoes some kind of religious transformation, basically, and the text says, quote, Anju's whole being seemed altogether changed. We know that something has happened. We don't exactly know what yet. But strangely, it says she becomes silent. She doesn't speak to anyone, including Zushio. And then suddenly one day she states that she proclaims to the brother Jito that she would like to work with the men collecting wood in the mountains. And Zushio is really surprised to hear this, and he doesn't understand why his sister is saying this. She doesn't talk to him anymore. So this is a surprise to him. And eventually the overseer permits her to work with the men, but he gives her the condition that she needs to shave off all of her hair so that I guess she looks more like a man. But in fact, this kind of emphasizes more than that, this ongoing religious transformation. I mean, shaving her hair, it's almost like she's becoming a monk or a saintly, priestly figure or something like that. And after the overseer lets Anju work with Zushio in the mountains, she seems filled with a strange joy. And interestingly, the changing of the seasons is described in the background here. The characters arrived in fall. They experienced the branding of their forehead in winter, and now it's turning to spring. And so this background, this change of the seasons in the background, emphasizes also this transformation that is going on within Anju. And then Anju reveals her plan to have Zushio escape alone to Kyoto, and she really commands that he escape. She says that he can make it through the protection of the gods and Buddhas, and if he is fortunate enough. So again, here we see in her language that there's a mix of religious faith and fate happening here, these two subjects. Anju then says, well, after Zushio presumably safely escapes, he can come back for her with help. And the text says that Anju, when she's commanding Zushio to do this, that she seemed now as wise as if possessed by some higher power, and that her words seem to have come from the gods or Buddha himself. So this really strongly emphasizes a lot of religious symbolism, and it almost seems her transformation almost seems to be metaphorical in that it's describing, or it's being compared to a kind of enlightenment, as if she herself has already obtained enlightenment and now has just come back to help others. So the climax of the story we arrive at now, and this is Zushio's escape to a Nakayama temple, where the priest there shelters him from Saburo's search party, who comes afterward, pounding on the gate in the night, demanding that the temple release Zushio. But the chief priest says, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have anybody here. So he lies basically to Saburo and protects Zushio. And then the following days, he and Zushio then go to a journey partway, at least to Kyoto. Zushio goes all the way to Kyoto, but at this point now Zushio as well has shaved his head and has donned Buddhist robes, so he too has kind of entered the ascetic life. Meanwhile, the text implies that Anju has committed suicide since her sandals, it says, were found at the edge of a swamp, but there's no clear description there's no actual description of this scene. So we don't really know. We just have some kind of indication that, well, she disappeared, maybe she committed suicide. But this as well, then, this kind of ambiguity reinforces, again, the religious symbolism of her and her transformation, that it almost seems as if after obtaining enlightenment, she was just taken up into the heavens. Or that she's already obtained enlightenment as a bodhisattva. This is what it seems like, anyway. And then the story goes, so the story follows Zushio now at this point, and he makes it to Kyoto, to Kiyomizu Temple in Kyoto, where he meets a court noble, Morozane. And Morozane immediately takes an interest in Zushio, and he asked to see the Jizo amulet that Zushio now holds on to. And after seeing this, Morozane, this is clear proof to him that Zushio is in fact of noble descent, and Morozane is even able to determine that Zushio is the son of Taira no Masauji, who is another high-ranking court official. Now, Zushio then now we witness Zushio's kind of transformation. This is also the falling action and conclusion of the story. Zushio is reinstated at court and takes the name Masamichi after this. This as well has clear Buddhist meaning and symbolism. This name, the Chinese characters would literally mean correct path, but in fact, they're also the characters used in the word for the Buddhist Eightfold Path, which is Hashodo, right? These characters here. So now he as well has undergone some kind of religious transformation, and he then also is promoted in a case of kind of literary irony here to become the governor of Tongo. It's good irony in this case. And his first act is immediately to outlaw slavery. And now, the story says, Sancho must pay his workers wages. And this point in the story is very interesting because it's actually unthinkable that the leader of a province or anyone would pay their workers wages in the Heian period. We're talking about a feudal society here. People don't work for wages. That doesn't happen until the modern period under capitalism, right? Everybody knows this. So obviously this is a contemporary reference that Mori Ogai has added to wage labor introduced to Japan in Meiji. And it could, as I'll mention later, even be a broader metaphor for the entire transformations that were going on at this time when Mori Ogai was writing and talking about the transition from the feudal system up until Tokugawa, and then when Japan became a modern nation state in Meiji. And Ogai, we also get an indication of how his thinking about these transformations, and he writes that the workers then, after moving to a wage system, became more productive, and that Sancho prospered more than ever before. Um, so Ogai is clearly saying, these modern trends, the modernizing trends, the end of feudalism, moving to a wage system, modern capitalism, whatever, is a good thing, it seems like. And this seems to be a repudiation of the feudal system in place in Japan up until this time. But to go back to the story then, we arrive at the conclusion. Masamichi, aka Zushio, travels to Sado Island to search for his mother. And serendipitously, he finds her. But she's blind and destitute, and quite advanced in age, and seems actually like she's partly, suffering from dementia, has lost her mind. And she's singing a song. And part of the lyrics of the song are, "My Anju, I yearn for you, fly away. My Zushio, I yearn for you, fly away. Little birds, if you are living still, fly, fly, far away. I will not chase you." And Masamichi actually doesn't even recognize his mother. She's changed so much until he hears this song, and then he knows that it's her. And in the last scene, the last scene is of them embracing. It's quite a powerful and emotional ending, actually, to the story. So I just want to talk about then, in a final analysis, of some of the main themes, which I've already mentioned, talking about as I've talked about the story. But just to recap, basically, I would say definitely one of the main subjects is faith. In this case, faith in the Buddhist gods rather than men, perhaps. And so a theme might be emerging here, of the importance of faith. How does this relate to the modernizing trends that are also going on in the story? I don't know. But, this is something to be explored here. The subject of authority, maybe the importance of questioning authority, but again, this is open to interpretation. The characters are, repeatedly shown as giving in to authority, but at the same time, Zushio does eventually try to, and successfully does, escape, and so this would be kind of going against authority. And the same thing is happening with this other subject of destiny or fate. But again, the text is ambiguous on this. How is the reader supposed to interpret this? Is everything preordained? Were the characters just like characters on a stage, kind of acting out their already determined actions? Or were they able to change their fates somehow, especially through the action of trying to escape? Or was that part of their fate too, to be, to go through this transformation? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe the answers are in the text, but it seems to be ambiguous and open for interpretation. Some of the symbolism and metaphor used in the story, certainly religious symbolism. The Jizo amulet is itself a symbol for the character's faith, the importance of belief and faith, and this is definitely the strongest symbolism in the story. But going back to that point of wages and where Mori Ogai kind of inserts his own thinking into the story, which is again a rewrite of an older story, I see this as partly a metaphor. The story itself is a metaphor for the transformation from feudalism, up until the end of the Tokugawa period, and then the transformation, the end of feudalism, the transformation to Japan becoming a modern nation state, adopting capitalism, etc., in the period when Mori Ogai was writing. Okay, and that's basically it. That's the story. It's an excellent story. I highly recommend it. And Mori Ogai is an excellent writer. There's a very famous film adaptation directed by Mizoguchi Kenji, I think, also about this story. which is excellent. So, reading and then watching that in tandem could be a great way to get a better understanding of this. But anyway, thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to our next talk.